I never imagined I would be sitting here late into the night, pouring this truth out to you. But if you have ever looked into the eyes of the person you promised to love forever and realized you were looking at a complete stranger, then this story is for you. They say hate is the opposite of love, but they're wrong. The opposite of love is indifference. And that is exactly what killed us, Dot. It ended in a small, dim Italian restaurant in the center of the city, the kind with worn wooden tables that hold too many secrets. This was the same table where Javier had proposed to me 5 years ago, back when his eyes used to light up when I walked into a room, back when we were a team. But tonight, this table wasn't a place of beginning. It was a tomb. Javier arrived 40 minutes late. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look at me as he slid into the seat opposite mine. His eyes were glued to the glowing screen of his phone, his fingers tapping out messages with a small, private smile that I wasn't supposed to see. Dot. I knew who was on the other end. Valeria, his personal assistant. I am 24 years old. The one who listened to his complaints about his boring wife. The one who felt the silence I had left behind, or perhaps the silence he had forced upon me out of a painful habit. I had already ordered his favorite pasta, the one with extra basil. It was the dish he used to say reminded him of our honeymoon. When the waiter placed it in front of him, Javier didn't even notice. He just picked up his fork mechanically, his eyes never leaving his screen. My heart hammered in my chest, not with fear, but with a strange, cold clarity. Javier, I said softly. He didn't look up. I'm leaving the city, I said, my voice steady. I'm moving to San Marino, to my grandmother's old cottage. I waited for the explosion. I waited for him to ask why, to beg, to yell, to show something. Instead, he finally looked up, but only for a second. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by a shrug. A shrug. As if I had just told him it might rain tomorrow. Do what you need to do, Isabella, he said, returning to his phone. To be honest, it makes things easier. Valeria and we are getting serious. She understands my ambition, you know? She makes things feel light. Those words should have destroyed me. They should have ripped my chest open. But at that moment, something inside me went still. It wasn't a shock. It was the final click of the door locking. I realized then that my marriage hadn't ended in flames or a screaming match. It had faded like fog. Javier had become a man obsessed with status, with the right image. His father had drilled it into him. You are what you own. You are who you are seen with. Somewhere along the way, I had become just another accessory to him, like his watch or his car. And when an accessory stopped shining, you replace it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just nodded. Okay, I whispered. He paid the bill without a word, stood up, and walked out into the cool night air without looking back. He didn't check to see if I was okay. He didn't care. I sat there for 10 more minutes, staring at the flickering candle. I wasn't mourning my husband. I was mourning the years I had wasted trying to be small enough to fit into his world. The next morning, the house was quiet. Javier had already left for work or for Valeria's apartment. I didn't care to know. I began to pack. I didn't take the expensive furniture we bought to impress his clients. I didn't take the jewelry he gave me as apologies for missed anniversaries. I took only what was mine. My clothes, my sketchbooks, and the few keepsakes from my life before him. As I taped up the last box, I remembered how I found out about them. It wasn't a dramatic detective moment. It was pathetic, really. He had left his tablet open on the kitchen counter 3 weeks ago. A message popped up. Can't wait to celebrate the deal tonight, my love. She won't suspect a thing. I had stood there, freezing in my own kitchen, reading months of messages. They weren't just sleeping together. They were laughing at me. Mocking my quiet nature, planning a future on the foundation of my pain, I shook the memory away. That Isabella, the victim, stayed in that kitchen. The Isabella leaving today was a survivor. I loaded my small car. The drive to San Marino took 6 hours. As the skyline of the stressful gray city faded in my rearview mirror, the landscape began to change. The concrete gave way to rolling green hills, and finally, the vast, deep blue of the ocean. San Marino was a place where time moved slower. The air smelled of salt and wild rosemary. My grandmother's cottage sat on a cliff overlooking a rocky cove. It was old, the paint peeling slightly, surrounded by wild hydrangeas. It was nothing like the pristine, cold penthouse I had left. It was imperfect. It was real. I unlocked the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. It smelled of dust and old books. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like room to breathe. I walked out onto the porch as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of violet and orange. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with sea air. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Javier. Where are the tax documents? I can't find them. Call me. No, how are you? No, did you arrive safely? Just a demand. I looked at the screen. I looked at the ocean. And then I did something I hadn't done in 5 years. I turned the phone off. Javier thought he had won. He thought he had discarded a boring wife to start a shiny new life with his young mistress. He thought I would fade away into the background, a sad, lonely woman regretting her loss. But he was wrong. He had no idea that he hadn't buried me. He had planted me. And while he was busy building a life of lies back in the city, I was about to build something he never thought I was capable of. I was alone. I was terrified. But as the first star appeared over the ocean, I made a vow to myself. I will never let anyone make me feel small again. But I didn't know yet that the past has a way of knocking on your door just when you think you are safe. And Javier wasn't done with me yet. The first week in San Marino was the hardest. Not because I missed Javier, but because I didn't know how to exist without the anxiety he caused. Would wake up at 6 a.m. with my heart racing, expecting to hear his heavy footsteps, expecting to hear a complaint about his unirone shirt or the coffee being too weak. But there was only the sound of the ocean crashing against the cliffs below the cottage. Freedom, I realize, feels a lot like vertigo at first. You are standing on the edge of your own life, dizzy because there is no one telling you where to step. I kept my phone off for days. I needed to detox from the toxicity. Instead, I walked the shoreline. The salt air felt like it was scrubbing the inside of my lungs, clearing out the fog of the last 5 years. For a long time, I had convinced myself that I was supporting Javier. But walking on that beach, I admitted the truth to myself. I hadn't been supporting him. I had been shrinking so he could feel big, but bills don't pay themselves, and my grandmother's cottage needed repairs. I dusted off my old portfolio designs I hadn't touched since the day I said I do and walked into town. There was a small but prestigious architecture firm called Desegos Del Mar, Designs of the Sea. The owner, Diego, was a man in his mid-30s with kind eyes and hands rough from actual work, not manicured like Javier's. I sat in his sunlit office, my hands trembling slightly. I have a gap in my resume, I stammered, already rehearsing the apology Javier always made me feel I owed the world. Diego flipped through my sketches. He didn't look at my gap. He didn't look at my nervous hands. He looked at my ideas. These are brilliant, Isabella, he said, looking up with genuine respect. You understand light? You understand how a home should breathe? Why have you been hiding this? Why have you been hiding this? The question hit me harder than an insult. I had hidden it because my light made Javier's shadows look darker. I was busy, I said simply. But I'm not busy anymore. Diego hired me on the spot. Working with him was a revelation. In the city, meetings were battles of ego. Javier's world was about shouting the loudest. But here with Diego, it was about collaboration. If I had an idea, he listened. If I made a mistake, he helped me fix it. He didn't roll his eyes or sigh. "You have a gift, Isabella," Diego told me one afternoon after we landed a major renovation project for a local hotel. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I went home that evening, dirt under my fingernails from the site visit, and I felt solid. Real. Meanwhile, back in the capital, the echoes of my old life were beginning to distort. I didn't ask for updates, but in the age of social media, you don't have to ask. My friend Sophia called me one evening, her voice hesitant. "Isabella, are you sitting down?" "I'm fine, Sophia." "Tell me, it's Javier and Valeria," she sighed. "They are posting everywhere. Dinners, trips, expensive gifts. It looks intense." I could hear what she wasn't saying. It looked expensive. Javier was a man who lived on the edge of his means to impress people he didn't even like. Valeria, young and hungry for the lifestyle I had abandoned, was feeding that beast. I knew Javier. I knew the look in his eyes when the credit card bill came. He would never show it to the world, but behind closed doors, the pressure would be building. "He's trying to prove he's happy," I said, sipping my tea on the porch. "Let him." "There's more," Sophia said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's telling people you couldn't handle his success, that you left because you were unstable, depressed." The anger flared for a second. The audacity. He breaks my heart, replaces me, and then rewrites history to make himself the victim. But then I looked out at my garden. The hydrangeas I had planted when I arrived were blooming massive bursts of blue and purple. They thrived because I watered them, because I gave them sunlight. Javier was watering weeds. "Let him talk, Sophia," I said, surprising myself. The truth always has a way of coming out, usually when you least expect it. I hung up and went back to my work. I was designing a sanctuary, not a fortress. Months passed. The seasons changed. I stopped looking over my shoulder. I was breathing deeply. I was laughing with Diego and my new colleagues. I was, for the first time, the protagonist of my own life. And then the bomb dropped. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The air in San Marino was warm and still. My phone buzzed. It was Sophia again. "Isabella," she said, and this time there was no hesitation. Just shock. "You need to know. They set a date for the wedding." I asked, feeling a strange numbness. "Yes, next weekend. It's going to be massive. The biggest venue in the city. Javier is pulling out all the stops. He's invited everyone. His biggest clients, his partners, even people from your old circle, next weekend." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. That was fast. "Valeria wants to secure her spot," Sophia said. "But is Isabella? It's not just a wedding. It's a coronation. He's trying to show the world he's made it. He wants to erase you completely." I stood up, walking to the edge of the porch. The ocean crashed below, ancient and unbothered. They were building a stage. A spectacle. They wanted an audience to applaud their perfect love built on the ruins of my trust. "Thanks for telling me, Sophia," I said. "I hope they have a lovely day." "You're not upset?" "No," I said honestly, "because I know something Javier has forgotten. When you build a house on sand, you shouldn't invite a crowd to watch." I didn't know then how right I was. I thought I would never see or hear from them again. I thought their wedding would be the final period in our sentence, but the universe works in strange ways. And sometimes, the karma you deserve arrives in the form of an uninvited guest with a loud voice and too much wine. The wedding was coming. and without lifting a finger. I was about to be the most important person in the room. I wasn't there when the walls came down, but I felt the tremors all the way in San Marino. On the day Javier and Valeria were getting married, I spent the morning hiking through the redwood forest behind the cottage. The fog was lifting, revealing shafts of golden light piercing through the ancient trees. I felt small, but in a good way held by the earth. Steady and sure, 400 miles away, in the sweltering heat of the capital, Javier was sweating in a tuxedo that cost more than my first car. I know the details because Sophia called me the next morning. She didn't just tell me the story. She painted a picture of a disaster so perfect, it felt like divine intervention. The venue was a historic palace grand, gold-leafed and intimidating. Javier had invited 300 guests. He wasn't just marrying a younger woman. He was putting on a show for his investors. He needed them to believe he was stable, wealthy, and in control. He had spent the last 6 months painting me as the crazy ex-wife who had dragged him down, and Valeria as his savior. The champagne flowed. The imported orchids wilted slightly in the heat. Valeria looked beautiful, Sophia admitted, but her smile was tight, plastered on like a mask. She was playing the role of the perfect trophy, but her eyes were darting around the room, making sure everyone was watching, but the most important guest wasn't the bride. It was Don Ricardo. Don Ricardo was a legend in their business circle. A billionaire developer, loud, boisterous, and completely unfiltered. He was the kind of man Javier desperately wanted to be, and the kind of man Javier was terrified of offending. Late into the reception, after the speeches had painted a fairy tale picture of Javier and Valeria's destined love, Don Ricardo sat at the main table holding court. He had enjoyed quite a few glasses of expensive red wine, and his voice boomed across the room. The music lulled for a moment, creating a pocket of silence just as Don Ricardo slapped the table. Laughing, Don Ricardo bellowed, his voice carrying to the nearby tables where Javier's biggest partners sat. I was just in San Marino last week. Beautiful place, peaceful. Javier, trying to be the gracious host, smiled stiffly. A nice vacation spot, Don Ricardo. Vacation? No. Don Ricardo waved a hand. Business. I'm looking to develop a boutique hotel there, and you'll never guess who I ran into. Your ex-wife, Isabella. The air left the room. Valeria froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Javier's smile twitched, threatening to collapse. Isabella? Javier asked, his voice tight. Yes, well, she went there to recover. It's been hard for her. Hard? Don Ricardo laughed, a deep belly-shaking sound that echoed off the high ceilings. Recover? Son, she isn't recovering. She is thriving. Guests turned in their seats. The whispers began. Don Ricardo continued, oblivious to the tension he was creating. I walked into Desegos Del Mar, the best architecture firm on the coast, and there she was. Lead designer. Diego, the owner, can't stop talking about her. She's brilliant, Javier. Brilliant. She fixed a design problem in 5 minutes that my team had been stuck on for weeks. Javier's face went pale. He had told everyone I was unemployed, weeping in a shack. And that cottage of hers. Don Ricardo went on, pouring himself more wine. I offered to buy it, offered her double the market value. You know what she said? She said no. She doesn't need the money. Apparently, her grandmother left her a trust and land rights I didn't even know existed. She's sitting on a gold mine, and she's living like a queen. Free as a bird. The silence in the room was deafening. In 3 minutes. A drunk old man had dismantled 6 months of Javier's lies. The guests exchanged looks. Wait, didn't Javier say she was destitute? Didn't he say she was emotionally unstable? Is she successful, wealthy, and happy? Then why did he really leave her? The narrative shifted instantly. Javier wasn't the successful man who upgraded his life. He was the fool who fumbled a brilliant, wealthy woman for a young assistant. He looked for the first time not powerful, but cheap. She sends her regards, by the way, Don Ricardo added, raising his glass in a toast to a woman who wasn't even there. Valeria turned to Javier, her eyes wide with humiliation. Javier, she hissed. You told me she was nothing. You told them she was nothing. Javier couldn't speak. He could feel the eyes of his investors boring him. They were judging his judgment. If he could lie about his wife, what was he lying about in business? The loans? The debts? His hand, gripping his crystal champagne flute, began to shake. He looked at Valeria, then at Don Ricardo, then at the crowd of people who were no longer looking at him with envy, but with pity. Crack. The sound was sharp and sickening. Cutting through the murmurs, Javier had squeezed the glass so hard it shattered in his palm. Champagne and bright red blood spilled onto the pristine white tablecloth, blooming like a dark flower. My God, Javier! Someone screamed. The illusion broke instantly. Waiters rushed over with napkins. Valeria stood up, her dress stained with splatter, tears of embarrassment finally spilling over. Javier just sat there, staring at his bleeding hand, the physical pain finally matching the destruction of his ego. He wasn't bleeding because of the glass. He was bleeding because the truth has sharp edges. And he had tried to hold on to a lie for too long. I listened to Sophia tell me this. Sitting on my porch in San Marino, a warm breeze playing with my hair, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel a rush of victory. I just felt light. I looked at my own hands. They were clean. They were steady. They were busy building a life, not a facade. Javier had wanted a spectacle. He got one, but the story didn't end at the wedding. That was just the beginning of the fall. Because when you lose the respect of the people who hold your debt, the collapse happens fast. And while Javier's world was shrinking into a cage of his own making, mine was about to expand in ways I never dared to dream. The wedding didn't end with a toast. It ended with a cleanup crew scrubbing a wine stain and a blood stain out of a white tablecloth. I wasn't there to see it, but the ripples of that night reached me like waves hitting the shore. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was slow, steady, and inevitable. The video of the incident, Javier, pale and shaking, the shattered glass. Valeria's humiliated tears didn't go viral on the internet. It went viral where it actually mattered, in the boardrooms and private clubs of the capital. In Javier's world. Reputation is currency, and that night his currency crashed. The investors who had been dazzled by his confidence began to look closer at his books. They saw the loans he had taken to pay for the perfect wedding. They saw the leveraged assets. They saw a man who was drowning in debt just to keep up appearances. Don Ricardo, the man who had accidentally started the fire, was the first to pull his contract. I need a partner with steady hands, he reportedly told Javier. And yours seemed to be bleeding. Others followed. The phone calls stopped coming. The dinner invitations dried up. And then there was Valeria. I don't hate her. Truly, I don't. She was young, ambitious, and she had believed the fairy tale Javier sold her, the same one he had once sold me. But fairy tales are expensive to maintain. When the money got tight, the arguments started. I heard from Sophia that they were living in a house full of silence. The lightness Javier had craved was gone, replaced by the heavy, suffocating weight of reality. 3 months after the wedding, Valeria moved out. She didn't leave a dramatic note. She just packed her bags and went back to her parents. She had signed up for a life of luxury, not a life of managing a sinking ship. Javier was finally alone, and me. My life in San Marino was blooming, just like the wild hydrangeas on my porch. I had finished the renovation of the hotel with Diego. It was a massive success. My name was in the local architectural digest, not as Javier's wife, but as Isabella. The architect dot one evening as I was pruning the rosemary bushes in my garden. My phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, so I answered. Isabella? The voice was ragged, tired, older than I remembered. It was Javier. I stood up, wiping the dirt from my hands. My heart didn't race. My stomach didn't drop. I felt nothing, just a calm curiosity, like looking at an old photograph of a stranger. Hello, Javier, I said. I heard about the award, he said, his voice cracking slightly. For the hotel, congratulations. Thank you. Silence stretched between us. I could hear the city traffic in the background on his end sirens, horns, noise. On my end, there was only the sound of the ocean and the wind and the trees. Isabella, He hesitated, struggling with the words. I made a mess of things. Valeria is gone. The business is difficult. I've been thinking about us, about how simple things used to be. I think I made a mistake. He was waiting for me to be angry, to scream at him. Or maybe he was hoping I would be the good wife one last time, that I would offer him comfort, tell him it would be okay, invite him to come to the coast. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Javier, I said gently, you didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. But I'm happy, Javier, I interrupted him. Truly happy. And I hope one day you find a way to be happy too. Without needing an audience. I didn't hang up in anger. I waited for him to say goodbye. But when he stayed silent, stunned by my indifference, I simply pressed the red button. I placed the phone on the porch railing and looked out at the horizon. The sun was dipping below the water, turning the world gold. I realized then that the best revenge isn't seeing the other person suffer. It isn't their bankruptcy or their loneliness or their public humiliation. The best revenge is just peace. It's waking up in a bed that belongs to you. It's drinking coffee without a knot in your stomach. It's knowing that your worth isn't tied to a man's approval or a bank account balance. Javier had tried to bury me, but he forgot that I was a seed. I went back to my garden. The rosemary needed watering, and tomorrow I had a new project to start. My life was full, not of things, but of purpose. I never looked back again. Looking back, I realized that marriages don't always end because of a lack of love. Sometimes they end because one person needs a fan club and the other person needs a partner. Maybe you're listening to this right now and you feel like I did in that Italian restaurant. Maybe you feel invisible. Maybe you're shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's world, hoping that if you just give a little more, they will finally see you. But let me tell you this, you cannot heal in the same environment. That made you sick. Walking away wasn't my defeat. It was my rescue. Javier thought I would be nothing without him. But the truth is, I became everything the moment I let him go. If this story touched your heart, if you have ever felt the pain of being undervalued, or the joy of finding yourself again, please share this with someone who needs to hear it. There is life after the heartbreak, and it is more beautiful than you can imagine. Thank you for listening to my story. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can keep sharing stories that matter. You are never as alone as you think you are.